Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Carsey Policy Hour. I'm your host, Melinda Negron-Gonzalez, and today our topic is women and policy. So this past Saturday in Maine, more than 1,600 women linked arms and walked together into the very cold Atlantic Ocean to celebrate International Women's Day. And the participants of this annual Women's Wave, as it's called, describe this moment as electric, right? There are thousands of women facing the cold water together, cheering one another on and reminding each other what they're capable of when they act collectively. So in the spirit of International Women's Day and Women's History Month, we've chosen to focus on women in government and governance this month for the Carsey Policy Hour. International Women's Day itself actually has roots in early 20th century labor and suffrage movements when women around the world mobilized to demand political rights, fair working conditions, equal participation in public life, and so on. And in the US, those struggles are recognized throughout the month of March during Women's History Month, which celebrates the many ways that women have shaped our politics, communities, and institutions. And so in that spirit, we're going to focus on women in government, and our speaker is going to focus on a timely question. How does women's representation shape the way public policy is made and the way that collaboration happens in public life? And she's going to explore that question through the lens of New Hampshire politics and leadership. So we are delighted to be joined today by Devan Quinn. She's the Director of Policy at the New Hampshire Women's Foundation, where she oversees research, policy, and advocacy programs. With a background in nonprofit advocacy, policy analysis, and political campaigning, Devan has spent her career focusing on the health, safety, and empowerment of women and their families. She's worked on domestic violence and children's mental health programs, among other things. So thank you, Devan, for being here to share your expertise with us this morning. But before we dive into today's discussion, I'd like to remind you that the Carsey School of Public Policy is independent and nonpartisan. The views expressed in the Carsey Policy Hour do not reflect those of the Carsey School or any of its partners. We're here to facilitate the free flow of ideas. And speaking of partners, I'd like to take a moment to thank our series partners, the New Hampshire Municipal Association, New Hampshire's Bureau of Education and Training, the New England Sustainability Network, and the New Hampshire Association of Counties. By the way, the Carsey School of Public Policy houses 4 research centers, and all of our policy briefs are on our website, in addition to our recordings of the Carsey Policy Hour and the speaker slides. So the recording of this and the speaker slides will be posted on our Carsey Public Policy, School of Public Policy website in a day or two. So do check us out. And by the way, we also offer 4 master's programs offered online and in person. So do check out our website, carsey.unh.edu. Okay, so before we begin, I want to remind you that we're here to prompt meaningful discussion. So there's going to be a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to submit your comments and questions during the discussion. And you'll find the chat button on the center left of your Teams screen. Please do share your contact info and your name when you leave a question or a comment. The chat is open and it's visible to everyone. So we do ask that your comments remain respectful and constructive, and do identify yourself when you leave a comment or question. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to our speaker, Devan Quinn. Devan, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. All right. Well, thank you so much, Melinda, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you for the Carsey Policy Hour. My name is Devan Quinn. I'm the Director of Policy at the New Hampshire Women's Foundation. I would be remiss if I didn't say happy morning after the local town elections in New Hampshire. And this is a fun day to be here talking about electing women, because We are hard at work right now collecting all of the results of the municipal elections last night. I know that we had a special election where Bobby Boudman won, so congratulations to her. We all have friends who are on the ballot or you voted for women, so if there's anyone you want to shout out in the chat, if someone you know, a woman was elected last night, let us know. That's fun timing. So I want to talk to you all about effective bipartisan solutions by electing more women. So first, to back up, I work at the New Hampshire Women's Foundation, and if you're not familiar with us, please look us up online and go to our website and join our email list. The New Hampshire Women's Foundation invests in opportunity and equality for women and girls in the Granite State through research, advocacy, education, and grant making. And our grant making, excuse me, provides grants to organizations in New Hampshire serving women and girls. We do a lot of research, and we have our flagship publications, The Status of Women and The Status of Girls. Please check those out. We do advocacy at the State House, and you'll learn a little bit about that. And we also run the Women Run program, which is the state's only nonpartisan program encouraging and training women to run for office. So you're going to hear a little bit about some of these programs as we go through. So let's back up and talk about women in government in New Hampshire, generally speaking. So this is one of my favorite pictures. This is from a few years ago when New Hampshire became the first in the nation with an all-women delegation. This is actually on the far right. So you have then Governor Maggie Hassan and Senator Shaheen, and next to Senator Shaheen, then Governor Ayotte, then Senator Ayotte, and then Representatives Carol Shea Porter and Annie Custer. So New Hampshire really has been making waves for electing women across the aisle at the highest levels. This is our federal delegation. We have lots to be proud of. However, when we look down at more local levels, that trend actually reverses. So in green here, you're looking at the State House, the New Hampshire House and Senate, where in the House there's 36% women and there are 42% women in the Senate. In red here, you're looking at the city level, and there are no women mayors. We had 2 a few years ago. Now we have no women mayors, despite 4 running this past fall. And at the city councilor or alderman level, that's 34% women. So school boards are 63% women at the city level, and we always see a robust showing for women on the school board. That is a traditional place that we see women elected to office, running for office, and we want to keep encouraging that. That's a fantastic place for women to grow from there and run for higher office after school board. And you'll see that at the town level too. In blue, we have 56% of women are on town school boards. But again, at the higher executive offices where we're making decisions about executive level decisions and budgets, that's only 26% women on the select board in towns. And one of the most staggering stats we have is that 39% of all towns had 0 women on their select board. That is something we really have to pay attention to, that a huge number of towns have no women on their select board. So we have this great story at the federal level of women's leadership, but then that dwindling down as we get to the lower levels of local office. So this is obvious to me, maybe it's obvious to you, but I'm going to spell it out for us. Why do we need more women in office? So let's start off with, studies have proved that regardless of party, when women serve, they're more likely to support policies that benefit women and girls in their community. Across the board, we see this at the federal, state, and local level. They either bring forth policy or they are supporting policies that are going to end up supporting women and girls in their community. They're paying attention to it more, and that is regardless of party. Research shows that women in elected office are more likely to seek bipartisanship and compromise than their male counterparts. So this is, again, an academic study showing this, but it's particularly important in New Hampshire, in a purple state where we have Republicans and Democrats who really have to come together very often, and we have to find that compromise, and women are very more likely to do so. And then, of course, generally speaking, from government to business to community, a diversity of perspectives leads to more robust discussion and includes more perspectives that lead to better outcomes. When we have more different people from different perspectives at a conversation, we're going to get a better outcome. That's, of course, true, not just for women, but people of color, for people with disabilities. When we're looking at the local level, we mean people who rent and people who own, people across ages, people with kids in the school system and without. When you have a diversity of perspectives, that leads to better outcomes. So we need women at the table for all of those reasons. So the next 2 slides I have, we're going to sit here for a little bit because I want to give you kind of some case studies on this. And I can tell you that research shows how important it is to have women in office, but I would love to show you how important it has been for women to be in office. At the Women's Foundation, we advocate at the State House for issues impacting women and girls, from maternal health and reproductive health, to girls' mental health, to menstrual equity, to a host of issues impacting women and girls, sometimes in a coalition, sometimes on our own. But through that advocacy at the State House, I have these fantastic examples that I want to show you. Maybe these pieces of legislation and these policies didn't find their way to you and you didn't hear about them. So I'm excited to share about these policies with you and these bills that were successful. But more importantly, the story that got them through the end and through the legislative process are really great examples to show how important women's leadership was to this process. So first off, I want to give you an example of effective bipartisan solution from a bill we supported in 2023 for menstrual products in prisons and jails. So we had heard that at the county level for jails, so again, a quick primer is that the state runs prisons, and there's one prison for women, and the counties run the jails. And so prisons and jails, and there's different reasons and organization to prisons and jails. But the distinction for our purposes was how menstrual products were provided within prisons versus jails. And we had heard from a lot of folks that in some jails, it was difficult to get menstrual products. That we had heard from several women that they would have to ask COs or correctional officers anytime they needed a tampon or pad, and they'd have to ask each time. And they wouldn't know how long it would take to get that, or maybe the CEO wasn't particularly inclined to do it that one is very busy at that moment. That made for a really stressful, difficult time for women in certain jails that were having difficulty with this. We also learned at the state prison that there was a better, more effective solution, which was giving all women who wanted or needed or asked for menstrual products all that they needed at the beginning of the month. And there was more of a trust-based process for giving women what they needed at the beginning of the month, and then they managed that how they needed to. So there wasn't frequent asking back and forth for CEOs. This is actually really important because we know through efforts related to PREA, or the Prison Rape Elimination Act, that anytime there's an imbalance of power between officers or staff in a prison or jail and those who are incarcerated in the jail, that is an opportunity to take advantage of that and discrepancy in power, and can lead to harassment, assault, or sexual assault. And so it's really crucial that women have access to menstrual products just for their own dignity and safety, wellness, hygiene, and also for broader issues in prisons and jails. So that's why we wanted to change the process so that jails had to provide menstrual products the same way that our state prison did. That was the intention of this bill, and I'm happy to say that this was passed. So on the right, I have a picture of Ophelia Burnett. She works at American Friends Service Committee, and she was a huge advocate, and I worked alongside her. She was able to build the trust of individuals to share their stories, and this is her on WMUR afterwards explaining the purpose of the bill. So I want to give a big shout out to all the women also in advocacy that were part of this as well. So here's the story of how this bill happened. We approached Senator Becky Whitley to introduce this bill. Becky had actually, the previous session had introduced a bill on eliminating any use of shackling of pregnant women while they are being transported for OBGYN appointments or even birth. And that was something that people didn't even know what was happening. And she really took an interest and leadership role in looking at equity and dignity issues among pregnant women in who were incarcerated. So we knew that Senator Whitley would be a good ally for this type of legislation, and so she was the sponsor of this. There was another sponsor of another very similar piece of legislation by Representative Ellen Reed in the House, and they worked together to find the right language between the two of them. And this passed in the House, it passed in the Senate, but the story of them at committee is really helpful. So here I have crucial supporters, and that was Senator Sharon Carson. Of course, Senator Whitley is a Democrat, Senator Carson is a Republican, Representative Ellen Reed is a Democrat, and Representative Jennifer Rhodes, I should have there, is a Republican as well. And the Department of Corrections Commissioner at the time, Helen Hanks, were all really crucial in this process. In both the House hearings and the Senate hearings, men definitely took a step back. And I say that with appreciation. It's very helpful for women to be able to talk about what is dignified and needed in relation to menstrual products. I remember specifically Senator Carson, saying that this was an issue of dignity. And she was really clear about that. And when there were issues about how much this might cost counties or jails, something that most senators, that definitely including Senator Carson, are very cognizant of, she said, no, this is an issue of dignity, and I won't think about it in any other way. And I really thought that was a beautiful part of her leadership on that committee that day. For Representative Rhodes' part, when this is in the House committee, she went a step further and she said, you know what, I also, in testimony in letters that Ophelia brought, she said, I'm reading that people are having a problem with underwear as well, because the underwear is recycled and provided for any individual who comes in to the jail, and sometimes they are stained. And, we heard testimony that they are washed and that it's hygienic no matter what. But again, that's an issue of dignity. So she even brought it to another level, and she said, I want to address this other issue as well. So there was so much great discussion and refocusing of what this issue was by women across the aisle in the House and the Senate. And I also want to note that the Department of Corrections Commissioner Helen Hanks was there the whole time. This actually didn't impact, she would represent the prisons, the women's prison in this regard. She actually didn't need to show up necessarily because it wasn't going to impact the women's prison, because we were basing it off of what the women's prison already did in best practice. And so, but she was there to explain how it worked. She was there to explain and to answer questions from the point of view of county jails who didn't do it this way. And so she was there to make sure, and she prioritized this in a session where there were many, many bills that were going to impact her department. She showed up to these, and I really appreciate all of the women who were part of this. The outcome here was that it was unanimous in the House and Senate, and it was signed into law. And I think sometimes people think that bipartisanship means a vote of Democrats and Republicans crossing the aisle. But in what I see time and time again is that women, particularly in the New Hampshire House and Senate, make sure that things are unanimous. You're actually not going to see as much legislation that's really focused on women's issues, supported by bipartisan women, that is going to, you're going to see it more unanimous. 24-0 in the Senate, a roll call or voice vote in the House, unanimous, because they are really good at making sure people are on board from the get-go by framing it as an issue of, in this case, dignity. So this was a beautiful example of how women lead and why we need more women in the State House. Okay, my next example is about Momnibus 2.0. This is another fantastic example. So for background, there was a Momnibus 1.0 in 2023. And if you're not catching the play on words here, an omnibus bill is something that includes a lot of pieces to that bill. And this one was focused on maternal health. And so we called it the Momnibus bill. Very sweet. In 2023, that was actually championed and thought of completely by Senator Whitley. Again, big supporter of maternal and women's health. That was so well supported. It was unanimously passed. It was put in the budget. It was a really important step in maternal health at the time. Senator Whitley did not run for re-election. But we had this, but so many legislators wanted to do more in maternal health. And Senator Denise Ricciardi, a Republican, was a very close partner and kind of co-sponsor with Senator Whitley previously. And so we asked Senator Ricciardi if she would sponsor Momnibus 2.0. She really did this in close partnership, almost as a co-sponsor with Senator Prentice, a Democrat. So in this picture, you can see this is a press conference we had for Momnibus. On the left, you can see Senator Ricciardi, and on the right in purple, you can see Senator Prentice standing side by side next to an OBGYN speaking about how important maternal health legislation is. So this was in a time where we're talking about hyper-partisanship, parties really sticking to certain sides, not as much bipartisanship. We are seeing women do bipartisan legislation for women. And that was a really wonderful example of bipartisanship in last year in 2025. I also want to point out that there were very important supporters from the House as well. Representative Caitlin Kutab and Representative Kim Rice, though they are both Republicans, and Representative or Leader Alexis Simpson, who is a Democrat and the leader of her party. It's very rare that you have all these folks from the House and the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, coming together on one issue. And not just one issue, it was a big package of maternal health. And they were so supportive of this. There was very few things that the whole group of them didn't want to support in this package. It was a really wonderful thing. We had Senator Ricciardi and Senator Prentice sit down at the committee and explain why this was needed. And then again, this was an outcome that was unanimous in the Senate, and then it was put into the budget, and then it came out that in that process. But again, you're going to see the vote was unanimous. It wasn't Republican versus Democrat. It wasn't some people crossing the aisle. Senator Ricciardi and Senator Prentice and the allies in the House, Republican and Democrat, made sure that this was supported from the get-go. There were also great stories throughout the process here of going through finance and women turning out in droves for both the committees, from OBGYNs to doulas to pelvic floor therapists to moms. Had so many stories. We had it covered in a lot of different newspapers. And then when it got to the point of funding it and had a small fiscal note, we had some fantastic supporters particularly Senator Cindy Rosenwald, a Democrat, and Senator Regina Birdsell, a Republican, both really fighting for that on finance. So again, women on the finance committee making sure that went through as well. And then we also had support from the House and the Committee of Conference. Everyone played a part, and it was a really wonderful day when that was signed into office. So these are two fantastic kind of case studies about how we're seeing bipartisan, effective solutions led by women in New Hampshire. So if it is so important that we elect more women, we know that we don't have enough women. We don't have equity in the number of women at the state house and in local levels. And we need to see more women running and serving in office because they will support issues for women and girls. Why don't we see more women running? What are the barriers and how can we change that? So studies often show that women do not see themselves as potential candidates for office, even though when they do run, they're just as likely as men to win. So I want to be clear, this is not an issue that women are running and losing. By percentages, when women run, they win at the same percentage that when men run, they win. So it's not an issue of people not voting for women, particularly at the local and state level. It's actually an issue that we don't see enough women running in the first place. And part of that reason is that they don't think about themselves as potential candidates oftentimes. Of course, I'm talking about in large numbers, but of course, there are women who say, I have always wanted to run for office, I'm going to run for office, and that is amazing. And there are also amazing men who also had to be encouraged to run for office. But on a whole, we see a theme that women don't necessarily see that in themselves. I hear lots of stories of folks, of women in their town saying, we're trying to find someone to run for library trustee, and we can't find anyone to run. And they're looking around, and they've asked 10 different people, and then finally they say, oh, someone asked me why I wasn't running. And so they didn't necessarily put themselves as a candidate to ask to run, but they could have anyway. So another barrier to women running is that they may assume they are underqualified, even though they are as qualified as any other candidate. So again, this is a theme we see, and we've seen numbers regarding to this, and of course there are exceptions on both sides of this, but this is a theme that we want to point out. And it's similar to what you see in any other industry. When you see, perhaps you've heard of this idea that a company will put out a job posting and a woman will see it and she'll say, oh, well, I only meet about 70% of the job qualifications, so I'm not qualified and I won't apply for the job. And a man sees the same job posting and he says, oh, I have 70% of those qualifications. I'm qualified, I should apply. And now the company only has one candidate, that man, when there would have been also a woman just as qualified. And so it's a self-perception to see if you're qualified or not. And that applies also to running. Women say, oh, I don't have experience with, school board budgets. Well, I mean, most people don't have experience with school board budgets. That's okay. Really, when it gets down to it, the only thing that matters when deciding whether or not to run for local office is if you care about your community. Do you care about your community? Do you care about serving? Do you want to learn more and listen to people? That's what matters, not if you are a lawyer or have kids in the school system or not, or you own a home or you've been here for 20 years. It matters if you want to give back. And so that's what we want to change when we hear women saying, oh, I'm not qualified to run. Yes, you are qualified to run. Another barrier we hear often is that, and a theme is women pointing to their career, their family, and other responsibilities as barriers to serving, literally just having the time to serve. And fair, of course, women have a lot on their plate, but so do men. And men are less likely to say, I can't run because, my family responsibilities, my career, other things that I have going on. But women are more likely to point to that. But women and men all both have careers and families. And so what can we do to shift and reframe that and say, what help do you need at home during your other responsibilities to make sure that we can find the time for you to serve? And I'll also say that people say, well, it's not the right time. I have little kids, or it's a big, busy time at work. It's never really a good time to run. There's always a reason not to run. And that is when we need you to run. There's never going to be a good time. Do it now. And this is both the barrier and the way that we can change this in the future. Women are more likely to run for office when they are asked to run, when they are asked to serve, and when they are encouraged to run for office. So again, when we talk about the woman who's looking for someone to run for library trustee and she can't find someone, ask her to run. It's more likely that women will run when they're asked, not just once, but many times. There are so many women who say, I want to see more women in office. And I think that there would be a great woman for library trustee. I'm sure she knows she'd be a great library trustee. I'm sure people have told her she should run. But no, you should tell her that she should run again. Sometimes it takes a few times. People need to hear it again. They need people to encourage them to run for office. This is what, if you're not ready to run for office, you can encourage others to run. If you're a man serving in your local community, that's fantastic. And that would be really powerful if you told the women in your life that they should run for office too. I'm doing it. I can answer all your questions, and you should definitely do it. That would be really powerful if more men and women were part of the solution to encourage lots of different people to run for office, particularly women. So what can you do even more broadly? Of course, I'm going to say you should run for office. We need more women to run for office. And if you need to be asked, I'm asking you right now, please run for office. And you should encourage the women in your life to run for office. We talked through that, but also support women running for office. Of course, this means vote for women running for office, vote for women who are running for the first time, but ask them how you can support them. Can you watch their kids while they're at a school board meeting? Can you help them put up signs? Can you make a donation? And also, and I know that the folks coming to a presentation like this are not going to be critiquing women in a different way, but we know that women are critiqued differently than men when they are serving in office. And this is part of both supporting women running for office and keeping women in office. I want all of us to be aware of when people are making comments about women who are serving that are not about the office and the job that they're doing. Things about comments about their appearance. Even sometimes when it's supportive, people love to comment on women's hair and clothes and what they're wearing. We don't need that because no one does that for men running for office. No one comments on men's hair and clothes when they're running for office. So say it when you hear it. When you see that in the community, say, I don't think that's really relevant. I don't think that matters. And I don't think we would say that about men running for library trustee. So I think that she's qualified and I think she'd do a great job. So you can be part of that change in your community by noticing that and redirecting those conversations, even when they're meant well. We want to keep women in office, and that means making a positive experience. I think this is just goes beyond keeping women in office, but keeping people in office, particularly in local office. It's hard. They give a lot of time. They're doing their best. They're listening as much as they can. And yes, you should keep your elected officials accountable. You should tell them what you need. You should demand things of your town and your cities and your state. And also we can, I think the pandemic showed us how much turnover there was at the local office level if people weren't just respectful and civil. And I think we're seeing some of that right now in a response to being civil, particularly while we're working in our communities to make them better. So these are all the things you can do to encourage more women to run for office and keep more women in office. And finally, I usually have a lot more in this presentation in our Women Run program. I mentioned at the beginning that the Women's Foundation operates the Women Run program, which is the Granite State's only nonpartisan program empowering and training women to run for office at the state and local level. We are a 501c3. We are a nonprofit. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit, and our program is nonpartisan. And it's a really great entryway to talk about electing more women. And who is welcome to come to our Women Run programs? That is women who are already running, women who are definitely thinking about running, women who are on the fence about it, and women who say, no, I would never run, but I want to encourage more women to run for office. I want to support more women. The Women Run program is about encouraging more women to run. And in those programs, we talk about specific opportunities to serve. We talk about different barriers, different myths and facts about running, and we also do advanced trainings once people have filed for office, particularly in the summer. We've done city programs where we go to every city to encourage more women to run, and we have seen wonderful things about that. And it builds community. More than anything, it is so important to have a community of people that you know who are also serving. I know so many women who've been through the Women Run program, people who have presented, people who are friends of mine who say, oh, I'm the only woman on the select board. And so they don't really know what I'm talking about when I'm bringing up this issue. But when I went to the Women Run program, I know a few other women and we've exchanged telephone numbers. And so I can talk to people in different municipalities about how they've handled different things and how they've run and how they've responded to different feedback. And so it's creating a community, and community is really helpful, both at the local level and the state level. And so we always want to encourage bipartisan, helpful community spaces for women to feel comfortable running and serving. So please go to our website and sign up for emails to get more information about Women Run. Finally, I want to end. I think we're ending a little bit early, so I have lots of time for questions. But I want to sit with for a moment and do a quick activity. I would like you all to think of 3 women in your life who should run for office. They don't need to be from New Hampshire. They don't need to be close people to you. This could be your mom, your sister, your wife, your best friend. It could be the woman you see in the carpool line. It could be the woman who the barista at the coffee shop who knows everyone in town. Think of 3 women in your life who should run for office, local office, state office, and identify why. Maybe it's because they're a really good listener. Maybe they're really organized. Maybe they have a specific skill that would be really helpful. Maybe they have been in the community for a long time. Maybe they're new to the community and that's why they should run. Think of 3 women in your life who should run. Identify why. And of course, as we learned here, the most important reason that someone should run for office is because they care about their community. And I would like you to identify how, where, and when you're going to tell them that. And that is the encouragement piece. Think of 3 women, why they should run, and tell them that. Are you going to tell your local barista tomorrow morning when you get a cup of coffee and the line isn't too long, so you can say, hey, I was at this event and they made me think of people who should run for office, and the first person I thought of was you because you know everyone in town and you do a great job at it. So identify when you're going to tell them so that you actually have an action plan. And I would love it if you wanted to put that in the chat and help other people think of things like that. You can say, oh, my sister would be great. She lives in Wyoming, but I'm going to tell her tomorrow anyway. Share those stories so that other people can be inspired them as well. But you can continue to think of that, I hope, for the rest of the day as well. So that's the end of my presentation. And I'm so happy to be here with all of you. And I'd love to take questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Devan. So if I may, I'm going to start with a question. You gave us some really interesting data in the beginning of your presentation. And so I have to ask, why do you think there aren't any women mayors in New Hampshire? What's that about? Or people on select board.
Yes. So I think that we need more women to run for mayor, and we need more women to run for select board. The reason we see more women at the school board is because more women run for school board. That's awesome. Keep running for school board. Keep encouraging women to run for school board, and that's a great pipeline to run for higher office. But we don't see women running for those executive levels at the town and city because they aren't running. It's not that they're not getting elected. It's not that people don't vote for them. We did have 4 women running for mayor, and it didn't work out, but we have a lot more than 4 cities, and we had 2, 3, 4 men running for city mayors in many towns. So of course a man was going to win there. But if you only have 4 women versus 2 men running in every city, of course that percentage is going to be lower. And that, of course, gets back to women not seeing themselves or being encouraged to run for executive level positions. Of course, that goes back to a socialization that women should be working in spaces with children and school boards. And yes, that's wonderful. And women should be in school boards. And they should also be at executive level decision-making and leadership positions too. So we can change that by encouraging more women to run.
As a follow-up, thank you. So it sounds like there are not different structural barriers at the mayor level than at other levels of government. I don't know if you could speak to that. I mean, we see that, in terms of congressional representation and at the governor level and so on, we've had great female representation, but then, is there something about that mayor level that really stops people or stops women from thinking, hey, I should run for mayor?
Well, you certainly don't need to have served in any certain position before you run for mayor or select board, right? But a lot of times, people who run for mayor often have served at city council or alderman. And so if we don't have enough women running for city council and alderman, then it's less likely that we're going to see women running for mayor. It doesn't have to happen that way. And certainly Jess Spillers ran for mayor of Manchester, and she was a school board member, and I loved that. But that is a traditional path. And so we do need people in that pipeline. And that goes not just for within your town, but beyond that. I'm worried that we don't have this pipeline of women running from school board to select board to mayor to state representative to state senate to running for governor, running for senate. It's that pipeline. No one needs to have the qualification of the lower office before they run for any. You can run for governor right now, and you should. But that is a traditional thing that we need to keep encouraging more women to run for different offices and higher offices.
Great. I encourage people to post questions or comments in the chat. So in terms of New Hampshire versus the rest of the country, do you have any data on how New Hampshire compares to other parts of New England or other parts of the country?
Yeah, so New Hampshire obviously is doing great at the federal level comparatively to other states. For the state house level, we're probably in the middle of the pack for New England. Some New England states are better, some are worse for women's representation. At the municipal level, I really just don't have that data. It's actually something that we struggle with and something that the Women's Foundation has really prioritized to make sure that, because there's no other place to gather the gender data of municipal representation, we go through and we go to every single town and we pull up all of these things and we call the city clerk and we send emails asking, and some towns have really great websites, and some towns don't have that information on their websites. And so it's a labor of love to just find out what the percentages of our municipal representation are. When I said that 39% of towns have 0 women on their select board, I mean, that took, hours and months of days of staff time to just figure out that piece of information, but it's so important, and that's why we do it. So I don't have that equivalent in other states, and no other states that I know of are collecting municipal data based on gender like that. And so I would love to see more of that. I would love to see a standardization of collecting gender data. Actually, at the state house level, there's literally a button, and you can pull the spreadsheet of all elected representatives and their gender. I think it is wrong. There are a couple of gender identities that are wrong, and so you have to adjust for that error. But at the whole, it's great for really not just me as a researcher to put that out there, but anyone can pull that information. And at the state house level, there have been 2 times when the Senate reached parity being at least 50% or more of women in the Senate. And there was a majority of women in the Senate, and last election, there was 50-50. But the state house has never reached parity. And there are many reasons for that. And there's a party differential. I'm not advocating any party aspect to this, but the facts are the Democrats do send more women, but not exactly 50%. And there are much fewer as a percentage Republican women. So I'm always saying we're never going to reach parity in the state house unless we see more Republican women running. So I would love to see more Republican women running. You saw in my case studies how important Republican women and Democratic women have both been to encouraging policies for women and girls. So I want to see a different perspective on this. There are also counties that don't send any women. Coast County has no women state representatives. So, there's a party aspect to it. There's county aspect to it. Where are we not recruiting enough women? And those are the opportunities even more so to think about how we can reach parity at the state house.
Thank you. A question from April Richer. Do you think that the cost of running has any correlation to women running?
Of course, when you're looking at the higher level offices, that we always hear about the millions of dollars running for Senate and governor and things like that. But when you get down to the state Senate, yep, that's still expensive. The state house, yes, that is does cost. Something at the local level, it is less costly, right? The more local levels, the less costly it is. There are plenty of people I know who have put their name on the ballot and done absolutely no campaigning at all. And their town is so small that everyone knows each other anyway. There's no need to put a sign in your yard about what your name is, because everyone knows you anyway. And so there are definitely opportunities around that, particularly at the local level. But I would definitely be remiss, and the point of the question is absolutely taken, that money is a big part of it. And so when we talk about having diversity of voices at the table at all levels, it can't be people with wealth or enough wealth to be able to buy their own signs and take a day off to go knock on doors to voters. That is a huge, we've talked about it a lot in a lot of different areas at the state house. Of course, that it is paid $200 and is a pretty full-time position for 6 months a year. And so who can do that? Not working class people who need to be at their job every day, not people with low incomes. And so that is very much part of the conversation, particularly with women as well, because women make less than men, and we're coming up on equal pay day. Women make less than men, have more responsibilities for childcare, for the time needed for it. So yeah, that is definitely part of it as well.
Great, thank you. Can you talk about gender and the intersection of other demographics like age, ethnicity, education level? What does that look like throughout New Hampshire? Because you gave us some really great information about women, but I wonder if you could parse that and talk a little bit about, age, education level, ethnicity, and so on.
Yes. So I talked about the lack of data we have at the municipal level and how much effort it takes just to find out gender. We don't have that level of detail for race and ethnicity or age. That would require a survey, essentially. That's not something that we could find out just from asking clerks at the town hall. That's something that we'd want people to be able to self-identify with. And of course, that self-identification, there are efforts to try to know how many LGBTQ representatives we have at the local level, but that would really come down to a survey. And so we might know based on how much of survey respondents we have in diversity. But these are really crucial, important things that we need to know. That is really hard without a survey that people absolutely fill out. That would, of course, be voluntary.
Right, exactly. So that's a recurring theme about how difficult it is to gather that data. I hope that researchers on this call are paying attention to that, Carsey people.
I know that Dante Scala has looked into this and at the State House level, and it's been really interesting to see his research. But it goes to the idea that you can't fix a problem that you don't know about. And so we can't talk about increasing diversity unless we have those numbers. Well, yes, we can talk about it without having the numbers, but it's helpful to have the numbers. I could say that we need more women in office if I didn't have the number, but it's nice to be able to say 39% of towns don't have any women on their select board, which encourages that urgency. But we shouldn't let a lack of data keep us from taking action.
Indeed. So you gave us some illustrative cases of bipartisanship, and I'm wondering if there are other particular policy areas in New Hampshire where increased representation by women has had especially noticeable effects. Can you give us some other examples?
Sure. Another case study I almost put in there was on girls' mental health in particular. And I think that there's a lot of great movement among organizations and nonprofits in our community, at schools, but also this legislature has also paid attention a lot to the issue of youth mental health in general. But the Women's Foundation, we recently put out a brief on girls' mental health, and that girls are more likely than boys to experience anxiety and depression. They're more likely to consider suicide, and girls are also more likely to seek help. And so there was a bill, I think this was Senator Ward, a Republican woman in the Senate, who put out a bill to have the mental health hotline on all school ID cards, which was fantastic. And, I testified saying that this is great for all youth, and it's particularly helpful for girls because girls experience poor mental health at greater rates, and they're more likely to actually call a number or text a help line. So we support for all youth, but I want you to know the gender aspect to this as well. And then later we saw another bill that had the eating disorder hotline on school IDs. And that was an interesting way to see how when we talk about how legislation and policy is impacting people based on gender, or how it might play out based on differences among youth, then we can see how an eating disorder hotline and girls are more likely to experience eating disorders. They said, why this one? Why of all hotlines to consider putting on an ID. Why this one? And we had that conversation of saying girls are more likely to experience this, and they're more likely to actually use a number if they see it. And so that was a great conversation at the State House where there was a lot of bipartisan support to support youth mental health. And it was a very welcome conversation about how that was going to impact girls in particular.
Thanks for that. Okay, that's a great example. Okay, we have a comment and questions from Stephen Bird. Okay, in terms of barriers, I'm wondering if the fact that women are disproportionately taking on more caregiver responsibilities than men is a stronger reason for lack of participation? Question mark. We know this is a big part of differences between men and women in terms of hours per week outside of work. And second, in terms of the research on more bipartisan outcomes via women from the scholarly literature, is there any discussion of why women tend to be associated with more bipartisan outcomes? He's particularly interested in issues that are not necessarily associated with policies for women and girls.
Amazing questions. Thank you, Stephen. It's like I planted these questions. Thank you. Fantastic. So first of all, the caregiving responsibilities. Absolutely, this cannot be understated that women take on a higher share of caregiving in their homes in heterosexual relationships, for sure. Men are starting to take on more caregiving, but women are taking on even more caregiving. So the discrepancy is huge, and that is 100% part of so many things, every single topic that I would come to the Carsey Policy Hour with, in terms of career, in terms of mental health and all these things. And of course, that's related to people running for office. We said that women point to their other responsibilities in career and family as reasons that they can't. And oftentimes I hear women saying, well, I have to put dinner on the table for my kids every night. Well, who's going to watch the kids? And sometimes they have husbands at home. And that is the obvious answer. And sometimes women don't have support at home. There are a lot more single moms than single dads. And so that's a real part of that conversation as well. So men have this great opportunity to step up and encourage the women in their lives, not by telling them they should do it, yes, by encouraging them to actually do it, but by also stepping up and say, what can I take off your plate so that you can put this on your plate? And it's a much larger social shift that we need to allow women to engage in a public sphere more by acknowledging and rectifying the huge disparity in caregiving at home and home responsibilities. So the second question is about research and bipartisan outcomes. Okay, so there is literature, and I'm happy to follow up with you if you want to receive in my email. There is literature on bipartisan outcomes. Most of that research is at the federal level on bipartisanship. And it did show that women are more likely to vote in a more bipartisan way. But I really feel strongly that, it's also part of the literature that there is more hyper-partisanship at the federal level, at the state level, not at the local level, because most towns are nonpartisan, which is a huge opportunity to get women involved, because women often don't identify with a party. A lot of times they come to us and they say, well, I'm not really a Democrat, I'm not really a Republican, I just really care about my community. And there's no better way to engage women than at the local level, because they are nonpartisan elections, which really speaks volumes about women's participation in a political sphere, and also about their bipartisanship. If they initially don't see themselves as partisan people, they are more likely to work with people of all different perspectives. I'd be happy to share, I know we're running out on time, so I'd be happy to share that literature on it, but I think it's even more crucial than their votes, and it is in who they are sponsoring and co-sponsoring legislation with, and how they were making sure that legislation comes through the legislative process as nonpartisan. I think it's not quite about crossing lines in partisanship, it's about women's leadership and making sure that things are nonpartisan, because We hear so much about hyper-partisan fights at the state and federal level, but so much work is done. Ask any legislator that honestly, the majority of things they vote on are things that everyone agrees on. They're making lives better. You know, we don't hear about those bills that come through that are, you know, no-brainers, that are unanimous votes. And so there's a lot of good work in there, and women are really good at making sure that their priorities that support women and girls or otherwise do different things are nonpartisan from the get-go. And I think that's a unique skill that women often bring to their service.
Awesome. That is a very good note to end on, I think. Thank you so much, Devan, for your presentation and all of this important information. I want to point out that April Richer put something in the chat about assisting with women running and other things. So I want to make sure of that connection. Thank you all for participating this morning, and join us in April when we will have people here to talk about the New Hampshire Environmental Literacy Plan. Earth Day is in April, so we're going to focus on the environment for the April Carsey Policy Hour. Thank you again, Devan. This was super interesting and important, and I wish you all a happy Wednesday.